You should be grateful you even have this job. The room went quiet so fast, I could hear the soft buzz of the lights above us. My boss, Derek Halstead, leaned back in his chair at the head of the long conference table. His arms were folded, and a thin smile rested on his face like he had just ended an argument. Every eye in the room turned toward me. My hands were still resting on the presentation folder I had spent 3 long nights preparing. My fingers tightened slowly around the edge of the paper. Grateful. After 70-hour weeks. After fixing shipment problems at midnight. After cleaning up mistakes Derek had made and never admitted. And now he said it like I was lucky just to sit in that chair. Heat rose behind my eyes, but I didn't cry. I didn't argue either. I just looked at him. And in that moment something quiet and sharp settled inside my chest. Because if Derek wanted gratitude, he was about to learn exactly how valuable I really was. My name was Rebecca Collins, and until that morning I had spent 5 years working in the operations department at North River Logistics. Most people in the company barely noticed me. But when something went wrong, they always came to my desk. If a shipment vanished, I found it. If the budget numbers didn't match, I fixed them. If a client called in angry, I solved the problem before it became a lawsuit. I worked quietly. I stayed late. And every time things improved, Derek Halstead stood in front of executives and took the credit. For years I told myself that was normal. Managers get the praise. Workers do the work. That was just the system. But the meeting that morning broke something inside me. Because Derek didn't just take credit. He humiliated me. He said I should feel lucky to work there. And humiliation has a strange way of opening your eyes. Once you see the truth clearly, you can't pretend anymore. The meeting had started like every other quarterly review. Department heads filled the room. Coffee cups sat beside laptops. A large screen showed the presentation slides. My slides. But Derek was the one standing in front of the screen. And as you can see, he said smoothly, clicking to the next chart, our new logistics tracking system improved delivery speed by 15%. The executives nodded. No one knew I had built that system myself. 2 a.m, 3 nights in a row. Derek continued speaking like the project had been his idea. Normally, I stayed quiet, but something about that morning pushed me to speak. I raised my hand slightly. Actually, I said carefully, the data shows we may need more staff to keep that level of efficiency long term. Derek stopped talking. Slowly, he turned toward me. The friendly smile on his face disappeared. Then he said the words that changed everything. You should be grateful you even have this job. And suddenly the room went silent. Across the table sat Kyle Bennett. Kyle was Derek's favorite employee. He had worked at North River only 8 months. But in that short time Derek had already promoted him twice. Kyle dressed sharp, spoke confidently, and repeated Derek's opinions like they were facts. His biggest talent was presenting reports I had written. When Derek said I should be grateful, Kyle leaned back in his chair with a small smirk, like he was watching a show. That smirk stayed in my mind long after the meeting ended. I packed my papers quietly, while the others avoided looking at me. Kyle walked past my chair on the way out. Tough morning, he said lightly. I didn't answer. I just nodded. Because something important had finally become clear to me. Derek wasn't just arrogant. He was careless. And careless leaders often make very big mistakes. The kind of mistakes that stay hidden until someone decides to start paying attention. That afternoon I sat at my desk staring at my computer screen. My email inbox was full. Shipment delays. Client questions. Budget corrections. Problems Derek had promised to handle, but quietly passed down to me. Normally, I would have started fixing everything right away. But that day I didn't. Instead, I leaned back in my chair and thought about the meeting. About Derek's smile. About the word grateful. Slowly, I opened a new folder on my desktop. I named it one word. Documentation. Then I began saving emails. Meeting notes. Approval messages. Every time Derek gave an instruction, I kept a copy. Every time I warned him about a risk, I saved it. I didn't change how I worked. I still solved problems. Still answered questions. But now I kept records. Because for the first time in 5 years, I wasn't just fixing issues. I was paying attention. And the more I looked, the more interesting things became. Once I started paying attention, patterns appeared everywhere. Derek approved projects without reading the full reports. Kyle presented updates he didn't understand. And whenever something failed, Derek blamed the team. Most of the time that meant blaming me. I reviewed months of emails late at night. The evidence stacked up quietly. Warnings ignored. Costs increased. Processes changed without testing. One email made my stomach tighten. I had warned Derek that a vendor change could delay shipments by weeks. He approved it anyway. 2 months later, the company paid thousands in late penalties. That mistake never appeared in any report, because Derek removed it. And suddenly I realized something disturbing. These weren't small errors. They were expensive ones. Very expensive. The deeper I looked into the records, the clearer the picture became. Derek Halstead wasn't just careless. His decisions were costing the company millions. 3 weeks later, the first real crack appeared. A major client called in furious. Several shipments had arrived days late. Their manager threatened to cancel the entire contract. Within an hour, Derek called an emergency meeting. Everyone gathered in the same conference room. Derek stood at the front with a hard expression. "Rebecca," he said sharply, "why wasn't this issue caught earlier?" Every head turned toward me again. I didn't argue. I simply opened my laptop. Then I pulled up an email. The message I had sent Derek 2 weeks earlier warning about possible delays. I turned the screen toward him. The date sat clearly at the top. Derek stared at it for a moment. The room shifted uncomfortably. For a second, I thought he might admit the mistake. But Derek recovered quickly. "Well," he said stiffly, "it's still your responsibility to monitor these situations." The blame stayed on me. But something important changed that day. People in the room started watching Derek more carefully. About a month later, corporate headquarters announced an internal audit. The message arrived through company email early Monday morning. Most departments groaned. Audits meant extra paperwork, extra meetings, extra stress. Derek laughed when he read the notice. "They do this every year," he told Kyle loudly. "Nothing to worry about." But later that afternoon, I noticed something interesting. The audit team requested detailed process documentation. They wanted to see exactly how operations worked: shipment tracking, vendor selection, client reporting, all of it. Guess who managed those systems? Me. For years, Derek had talked about them in meetings. But I was the one who actually built them. That afternoon, Derek walked past my desk twice. Both times he slowed down like he wanted to say something. But he kept walking. And for the first time since I joined the company, Derek Halstead looked nervous. Then Derek made his boldest move. 2 weeks before the audit interview started, he called a short department meeting. Everyone gathered near the center desks. Derek cleared his throat. "I have an exciting announcement," he said. He placed a hand on Kyle's shoulder. "Kyle Bennett will be stepping into the role of project manager starting today." My role. The promotion I had been working toward for years. No warning. No conversation. Just a decision. Kyle's smile stretched wide. "Guess hard work pays off," he said while walking past my desk afterward. I returned the smile politely. Inside my mind, however, a quiet thought formed. Let's see how long that lasts. Because the job Kyle had just accepted came with responsibilities he didn't understand. Processes he had never learned. And systems he had never built. For the first time in months, I decided not to help more than necessary. Kyle lasted exactly 2 weeks. That was how long it took him to realize the department was far more complex than it looked. 3 times a day, he stopped by my desk. "Rebecca, where do we track vendor compliance again? Do you have the reporting template for client updates? How do you manage escalation calls?" His voice sounded confident at first. But each day the questions became more urgent. I answered politely. I showed him where documents were stored. But I stopped doing the work for him. Kyle started staying late. So did Derek. From my desk, I could hear quiet arguments inside Derek's office. One evening, Kyle walked out looking pale. He noticed me watching and forced a quick smile. Just learning the ropes, he said. I nodded, but the cracks were already spreading. And the audit interviews were getting closer every day. One afternoon, a major client requested a leadership call. The shipment delays had made them nervous. Derek asked Kyle and me to join the meeting. We sat around the conference phone while the client's voice filled the room. Halfway through the conversation, the client asked a technical question about shipment routing algorithms. Kyle went silent. Derek frowned slightly. Neither of them spoke. Finally, the client asked another question. Rebecca, you designed the routing system, correct? The room froze. Derek turned toward me slowly. Wait, he said. You designed it? I nodded once. Yes. The client thanked me and asked for an explanation. I described the system clearly. By the time the call ended, the client sounded reassured. But Derek didn't look reassured at all. He stared at the conference table quietly, because for the first time he realized something very uncomfortable. He didn't actually understand how his own department worked. The audit team arrived the following week. 3 analysts and 1 senior auditor set up temporary desks near the finance department. At first their questions were simple. Basic process checks. Policy reviews. But soon the questions became deeper. They asked about shipment delays, vendor costs, operational changes approved during the past year. Every time a difficult question appeared, Derek called me into his office. Fix this, he would say while sliding reports across his desk. But this time I didn't change numbers or soften explanations. I simply gave them the facts, exact data, real timelines, actual approvals. The auditors listened carefully. They took notes. Sometimes they asked follow-up questions. I answered honestly every time. And slowly the mood inside the office began to change. People whispered in the hallways. Because the deeper the audit team looked, the clearer the real story became. One night my phone buzzed with a new email notification. It was from the senior auditor. She asked for the original operational spreadsheets from the last 2 years. Not the summary reports Derek presented. The real data. I opened my laptop at the kitchen table and began gathering files. Shipment records. Vendor costs. Delay logs. Everything. Then I remembered the folder on my desktop. Documentation. Inside it were months of emails. Warnings I had sent Derek. Recommendations he had ignored. Approval messages he had signed without reading. I attached the operational data first. Then, after a moment of thought, I attached several email chains as well. Not accusations. Just records. The truth written in timestamps and messages. Before sending the email, I paused for a moment. Then I clicked send. And somewhere deep inside my chest, I felt the first quiet sense of justice beginning to move. Derek still acted like nothing was wrong. The audit team walked around the office every day asking questions, but he kept his usual confident smile. One afternoon I passed his office and heard him talking to Kyle. Executives trust me, Derek said. They know I get results. Kyle nodded quickly. They won't listen to auditors, he added. I kept walking, but their words stayed in my mind. Because results only mattered if they were real. And the numbers were beginning to show a different story. Every evening the auditors stayed later than the rest of the office. Stacks of reports grew on their desks. Sometimes they called employees in for quiet interviews. They called me twice. Each time they asked careful questions about systems I had built. Each time I answered honestly. Meanwhile, Derek continued walking through the office with the same confident smile. But I noticed something new. He checked the audit team's desks more often now, like he was trying to read their faces. 2 months after Derek's grateful comment, another meeting appeared on everyone's calendars. Same conference room, same long table, but the mood felt very different. Executives from headquarters had arrived that morning. The audit team sat near the front of the room. Stacks of files rested beside their laptops. Derek entered last. His smile looked tighter than usual. Kyle sat beside him, flipping through a notebook quickly. I took my usual seat near the middle of the table. The senior auditor stood when the meeting began. Thank you all for attending, she said calmly. We've completed our review of the operations department. Her voice was steady, but the room felt tense. She connected her laptop to the projector. A large chart appeared on the screen. Numbers filled the slide. Costs. Delays. Operational changes. Derek leaned forward slightly. For the first time since I had met him, he didn't look confident. He looked uncertain. The senior auditor pointed to the chart. These numbers represent operational losses from the past 18 months, she said. A red line stretched across the screen. Total losses exceed $2 million. A low murmur moved around the room. Derek sat very still. These losses, the auditor continued, are connected to several process changes approved by department leadership. She clicked the screen again. Email timestamps appeared. Approval records. Decision notes. Derek cleared his throat. Well, he began quickly. Operations involve many moving parts. Sometimes teams make mistakes. His eyes moved toward me. But the auditor shook her head. These approvals came directly from leadership, she said calmly. She opened another document. More emails. More signatures. More dates. My documentation folder had done its work quietly. Derek leaned back slowly in his chair. His confident smile had disappeared completely. For the first time, the room was no longer watching me. They were watching him. Kyle began sweating halfway through the meeting. I noticed it when he wiped his forehead with a folded napkin. Every time Derek tried to explain something, the auditors asked Kyle to confirm details. Can you explain the vendor selection process? One auditor asked. Kyle opened his mouth, then closed it again. I believe the team manages that, he said finally. Another auditor leaned forward. And the shipment routing system? Kyle looked down at his notes. I'm still learning that part, he admitted. The executives exchanged quiet looks. For months, Kyle had acted like he controlled the department. But now the truth was becoming clear. He didn't understand the systems. He didn't know the data. He barely knew how the department worked. Meanwhile, the auditors kept asking questions. And every time they did, Kyle looked more nervous. Because slowly the room realized something important. The real expert had never been Derek. And it definitely wasn't Kyle. It had been me all along. Then the biggest moment of the meeting arrived. The senior auditor stepped forward again. There is something unusual we discovered during our review, she said. She changed the slide. A new chart appeared. This one showed shipment efficiency over several years. For 3 years, she explained, the department systems performed very well. The line on the chart stayed high and steady. Then she clicked the screen again. The line suddenly dropped. That drop began when leadership started overriding recommendations made by one employee. She paused. Then she said my name, Rebecca Collins. Every head in the room turned toward me, including Derek's. The auditor continued calmly. Rebecca repeatedly warned leadership about vendor risks, process changes, and staffing shortages. Another slide appeared. Emails filled the screen. My warnings. My recommendations. My reports. The room remained completely silent. Because now everyone could see the truth clearly. The systems had worked perfectly. Until Derek stopped listening. Derek tried one last time to regain control. He leaned forward quickly. Rebecca helped implement those systems, he said. She should have prevented these issues from happening. His voice sounded sharper now. For a moment the room felt tense again. Then the auditor opened another file. More emails appeared on the screen. Dozens of them. Rebecca warned leadership about each of these decisions, she said. She highlighted several messages. Dates. Times. Clear explanations. These recommendations were rejected by Derek Halstead. The room fell silent again. Derek stared at the screen. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Because the evidence spoke for itself. Every warning, every ignored report, every risky decision, all recorded clearly. For months, Derek had blamed the team for problems. Now the truth sat in front of the entire executive board. And this time, the silence in the room wasn't for me. It was for him. After a long moment, one of the executives leaned forward. He looked directly at me. Rebecca, he said calmly, if these operational changes were reversed, could the department recover? The question surprised me, but I answered honestly. Yes. The executive nodded. How long would that take? I thought carefully before responding. About 3 months, I said. Maybe less. The room remained quiet while the executives exchanged brief glances. One of them wrote something down on a small notebook. Derek watched them with wide eyes. For the first time since the meeting began, he looked powerless. No confident smile. No sharp explanations. Just silence. The senior auditor closed her laptop. That concludes our review, she said. The meeting slowly ended. People stood and began leaving the room. I gathered my folder quietly. As I walked toward the door, Derek remained seated at the table, still staring at the screen, still saying nothing. 2 days later, Derek didn't come to work. At first, people assumed he was sick. But around noon, HR sent a company-wide email. Derek Halstead had resigned from his position. No explanation. Just a short message thanking him for his service. The office felt strangely quiet that afternoon. People spoke softly near the coffee station. No one looked surprised. Kyle stayed in his office most of the day. When he finally walked past my desk, his shoulders looked heavy. He stopped for a moment. I guess things got complicated, he said quietly. I nodded politely. Kyle transferred to another department the following week. No celebration. No announcement. Just a quiet move. When his desk became empty, the operations floor felt different. Like a storm had finally passed. For the first time in months, the office felt calm. A week later, an email arrived asking me to visit the executive office. I walked upstairs feeling curious but calm. The chief operating officer greeted me with a handshake. 2 other executives sat beside him. They invited me to sit. The COO slid a folder across the table. We've spent the last week reviewing your work, he said. He opened the folder. Inside were several reports I had written over the years. Frankly, he continued, it appears you've been doing leadership's work for quite some time. I felt my cheeks warm slightly. We'd like to correct that, he added. He turned the final page of the folder toward me. The title sat clearly at the top. Director of Operations. The offer included full responsibility for the department. For a moment, I simply stared at the paper. 5 years of quiet work had finally been seen. And this time, no one else would take the credit. The company announced the leadership change the following Monday. An email went out to the entire department. Rebecca Collins, Director of Operations. I expected shock. Maybe confusion. But when I walked onto the operations floor that morning, the reaction surprised me. People smiled. Some even clapped quietly. One of the warehouse coordinators walked over and shook my hand. About time, he said. Others nodded in agreement. For years, they had seen who solved the problems, who stayed late, who answered every emergency call. I hadn't realized how many people noticed. As the day continued, employees stopped by my office with suggestions and ideas. The department felt lighter, more open. For the first time in years, people spoke freely about improving systems. And for the first time in 5 years, I walked through the office without feeling invisible. 3 months later, the changes were clear. Shipment delays dropped dramatically. Vendor costs stabilized. Client satisfaction increased. Many of the improvements came from simply restoring the systems I had originally designed. The same systems Derek had ignored. The same warnings he had dismissed. But now the department worked as it was meant to. Efficient. Organized. Focused. Clients who had threatened to leave began renewing contracts. Executives from headquarters visited the office again. This time their meetings felt very different. Instead of explaining problems, we discussed new growth plans. One afternoon, I stood near the operations floor window watching employees work. Phones rang. Computers hummed. Packages moved through the warehouse smoothly. For the first time since joining North River Logistics, the success Derek used to claim in meetings had finally become real. And this time, everyone knew exactly who built it. Sometimes I still remember that meeting. The moment Derek leaned back in his chair and said the words that changed everything. You should be grateful you even have this job. At the time it felt humiliating, like my years of work meant nothing. But now I understand something important. Derek believed gratitude meant silence, acceptance, enduring whatever treatment came from above. But he was wrong. True gratitude comes from being valued, from being respected, from knowing your work matters. The moment someone tells you to be grateful for being undervalued is usually the moment you realize your worth. That realization changed my life. Because once you truly see your value, you stop waiting for someone else to recognize it. You start building something better. And sometimes the greatest revenge isn't anger. It's success. The kind of success that proves you were never the problem at all.